on, taking this concept of jihad to legitimate what they choose to do.
Muhammad had spoken about jihad while the Muslims still lived in Mecca. But the new revelations now stressed a different side of jihad. They came at a time when Muslims in Medina were fighting for survival, for most had not been permitted by the Quraysh to leave Mecca with any valuables.
When Muhammad and his followers arrived in Medina, of course they were then, in a sense, exiles from their hometown. They were, to put it bluntly, unemployed. They didn't have any obvious source of support.
They weren't date farmers, and all the available land in this agricultural settlement was already spoken for, so they began to make raids.
God had given Muslims the order to struggle. Now God's revelations allowed that struggle to include the right to survive.
And so you also see the way in which jihad then comes to be defined as the right and indeed at times the obligation of Muslims, both as individuals and of the Muslim community itself, to defend itself, to engage in defensive warfare.
Armed with the Quran's approval of defending their community, Muhammad chose a traditional Arab solution: defend yourself by attacking. Muhammad would lead an army to raid the most important Quraysh caravan of the year. Muhammad's plan was to intercept the caravan as it approached the wells of Badr near the Red Sea. But before his forces got to the wells, word of the Muslim army reached Mecca. Quraysh leaders were outraged that Muhammad would attempt to capture their caravan. 1,000 men marched out of Mecca to meet the Muslim army. Muhammad now knew the Quraysh would force him to fight. The night before the battle, the Prophet had no idea if his men were willing to die in what had now become war. But after listening to stirring speeches, his followers vowed to offer their lives for Islam. The Quraysh army outnumbered the Muslims by 3 to 1. But as the battle began, Muhammad revealed he had a great sense of tactics, and his warriors fought with ferocity. The Quraysh leaders had believed a show of force would be enough to defeat the Muslims. But by midday, it was the Meccan army that panicked and fled the field. The dedication and cohesiveness of the Muslim army had saved Islam. Now Islam would reveal itself to be not only worthy of victory, but capable of compassion as well.
After the first victory that the Muslims achieved at the Battle of Badr, the Muslims began in the usual Arab way to kill all the survivors, and Muhammad immediately had a revelation to say, no, this must stop. There must be no killing of survivors.
Muhammad had set his eye on a more distant goal. The Muslim warrior's enemy of today must tomorrow become his brother in faith.
Say to those who are captives in your hands, if Allah findeth any good in your hearts, He will give you something better than what has been taken from you, and He will forgive you.
The victory at Badr had great consequences. After the battle, converts from all over Arabia began to flock to Medina. Like the Muslims, these converts saw the victory as a sign of God's salvation and protection, similar to God's parting of the Red Sea for the Israelites.
The Battle of Badr has enormous significance to the Muslim community, and I think that was the first political act that was successful, which cemented the vision or the dream that Islam could establish a community. Islam could become a civilization.
For 3 more years, the Quraysh army would try and destroy the Muslim community. They would win some battles, but always Muhammad and his followers struggled and survived as their numbers continued to grow. As the Meccan army struggled home after a final unsuccessful battle, their leader was at last forced to admit, every man of sense now knows Muhammad has not lied. Medina and the Muslim community were finally safe from attack. The Prophet was now poised for the final step in the pursuit of his destiny. That step would be his return to the holy city of Mecca. Muhammad's life in Medina was austere but comfortable. He had few possessions but wanted for nothing. He lived in quarters attached to the mosque, usually spending each night in the room of another of his wives. Muhammad's wives were a diverse group. One was a Jew, another a Bedouin. One was even his cousin. Most were chosen for various political reasons, but a few, such as his third wife Aisha, were clearly matters of the heart. Muhammad now told his followers that revelations from God said each man was permitted to take no more than 4 wives, and the husband was required to treat them all as equals.
Marry women of your choice, 2, 3, or 4. But if you fear that you will not be able to maintain justice between your wives, then marry only 1.
The modern world has frequently come to view Islam as male-oriented at best and misogynistic at worst. But in truth, Muhammad's teachings brought women new rights that would not be achieved in the Christian world for centuries. The first was the right to life. The Quran forbade the practice of female infanticide, which had been common in early Arabia.
Women were also given the right to an education, to be duly educated as men were, to inherit, which meant that they could buy and sell property, which again would mean that they would have to undertake business transactions.
The custom of Muslim women wearing veils is mistakenly pointed to as another indication of Islam's prejudice against women.
The emancipation of women was a project that was very dear to the Prophet's heart. There is nothing in the Quran about all women having to be veiled or secluded in a separate part of the house. This is a practice that the Muslims picked up 3 or 4 generations after the death of the Prophet.
I feel that being a contemporary educated woman is far more in line with what the Prophet would have aspired for a woman than what we've seen maybe throughout recent Islamic history.
Muhammad had achieved enormous success. His followers had grown in less than 20 years from a handful to thousands of devoted converts. But he could not complete his mission so long as the holy site of the Kaaba remained home to idols. In January of the year 630, Muhammad set out for Mecca at the head of an army of 10,000. As the Muslims approached the holy city, Meccan people made no attempt to resist. It was clear that the old gods of the Quraysh were powerless in the face of Islam. The Prophet had no desire for blood. He issued an amnesty as a symbol of his wish to unite all people as the children of one God. The only victims he sought remained sitting in the Kaaba. The Prophet entered the holy structure and proceeded to lead the destruction of all 365 idols as he recited the verse, "The truth has arrived and vanquished falsehood." Muhammad had validated his vision and proclaimed to the world the force and vitality of Islam. By the time of his death in June 632, the Prophet had brought peace to Arabia. He had transformed a religion of many gods into a powerful monotheism based on a moral and ethical guide for daily living. But Muhammad's death was actually the birth of the great age of Islam. Within 100 years, the words of the Prophet spread from Arabia to the world. As Arab culture mixed with Greek and Byzantine learning, an era of Islamic enlightenment brought enormous advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, literature, and architecture.
Who would have thought, today, let alone then, that a man who is described as born an orphan into a divided Arabian society, illiterate, a caravan manager, would create a religious tradition that within 100 years of his death, its physical presence would spill out of Arabia, go all the way to North Africa, and all the way over to India.
And he always warned his followers not to make him into a Jesus, not ever to say that he was divine. He was just an ordinary man, he said.
The fact that he led what we might call a normal life, I think, makes him very appealing to many Muslims, to most Muslims perhaps, that he married, that he had children.